Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now here we are, the longest day, the peak of the year, bright sunshine, but also we've been having quite a lot of rain. And that combination of summer sun and rain here at Longmeadow means lushness. And that means it tends to flop. The rain bashes it and the paths get covered, everything is falling over. You walk past and you get a soaking as the leaves are like sponges. So I try and hold them up and hold them back. But of course, the real skill is to make it look as natural as possible. I'm using these hurdles that are actually made a few years ago out of chestnut. And sometimes we use wire supports. So the idea is not to put them into a rigid line, but just to prop them up and get them growing in the right direction. At this time of year, you want to embrace the exuberance of summer, but maybe just stop everything falling apart too much. On today's programme, Francis visits an allotment in Oxfordshire to join a gardener who values the welfare of wildlife above all else.
Your ecosystem makes allowances for there being some pests on your produce.
Yes, you need the pests to get the predators.
Rachel reveals how to create a dramatic summer display by using containers.
I love the way that these little daisies, the centre of them just picks up on the leaf of the heuchera, so there's a lot of real loveliness going on in here.
And Joe goes to Cornwall, where he's given an exclusive tour around the family garden of the singer Will Young.
Gardening's really become a very beneficial thing for my well-being and something that I actually deliberately put into my daily, weekly, monthly routine.
And I shall be checking up on my bees and hopefully harvesting some honey, as well as planning ahead in the jewel garden, clearing and planting to keep it looking really good right throughout the summer months. Come on, good girl. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now is a good time to plant sweet corn because as the weather gets warmer and warmer, they will grow quickly. I've been growing these in pots. You can see they've got a nice root system, and I'll plant them out in a grid. And the reason you do that is for pollination. They pollinate by the wind. Now, obviously, if the wind is coming from the west and you've got north-south rows, it's just going to blow them sideways away from the other plants. And they won't pollinate, and you won't get seed, therefore no corn on the cob. Whereas if you've got them in a grid, it doesn't matter which direction the wind is coming from, they will get pollinated. And they don't want to be any closer than that, because these should grow to quite decent-sized plants, sort of 5-6 foot tall, and they need room to grow. The whole point of growing sweet corn is in the name, to be sweet. And these are one of those plants whose sugars convert to starch very quickly. What they always say with it is you should put the water on and only go and harvest the cobs when the water is boiling. Take them straight back to the kitchen, plunge them in the water. They take about 10 minutes or so to cook and eat them straight away. And you get an incredible sweetness that you really, truly can't buy. Now, I am going to put in some lettuce in amongst it. This is a variety of cos called Maureen, which will grow quickly at this time of year and be ready to harvest in a matter of weeks before the sweet corn gets too big and would shade it out. And I can just pop this in the gaps. I like cos at this time of year because they have a crispness that is fresh and really tasty, and it's a great summer lettuce. However, if they dry out, they can all bolt, and I've gone away for a couple of days and come back to find a whole set of one planting all bolted. So you do need to keep them well watered. Last one in. Right. Now that little cos lettuce will be ready to eat in about 4 weeks' time. I've got a whole bed of cos that is absolutely at its best right now. These, and this is a variety called Cosmic, were sown at the beginning of March, so they're growing much more slowly. And it is important that when you're trying to get your rotation and your constant supply right, you take into account the different times of year. Anything sown now or in the last month will grow much quicker than anything grown at the beginning of spring. And if I cut one, and I've got plenty so I can afford to dissect it, so to speak, if you take off the outer leaves, inside is a lovely, fresh, upright heart, and they're really beautiful. And although inevitably you get a little bit of a glut, you give them away, you eat as many as you can, and if the worst comes to the worst, they make very good compost. These beans were sown even earlier. These were sown last October. And I have to say that even I'm very surprised at how well they've done. I don't think I've ever had better overwintering broad beans. I love broad beans when they are so small that you can eat them raw. But that's good. That's really good. Apparently, bees love broad bean flowers. It gives them an almost perfect balanced diet. So not only when you grow broad beans is it great for you, it's also doing a bit for wildlife. And you can combine quite intensive vegetable growing with good wildlife. And Francis, who is making an allotment in Kent, has been to Oxfordshire to visit another allotment site where wildlife is treasured as highly as vegetables.
Having an allotment is an amazing privilege. Obviously, it's an opportunity to grow some lovely produce and plants, but it's also a chance to do something of huge importance. By encouraging all creatures, great and small, to our growing plots, you can make a real difference to our native wildlife. There's a real tide of change when it comes to environmental issues at the moment, and I'm keen to do my bit on my plot back in Kent. So I've come to this allotment in Oxfordshire to get some advice about being wildlife friendly. These 2.5 plots were transformed in 2010 from a fairly ordinary overgrown site to this extraordinary wildlife haven. This gorgeous space is down to the passion and planting power of one woman, Nadine Machunas. Hi Nadine.
Hi, Francis.
This isn't normal allotmenting.
When I have a bit of time, I'm taking pictures.
This is no ordinary allotment. Nadine is an ecologist who's fascinated by the wildlife on her plot and spends hours recording it. And that's not an Oxfordshire accent I'm detecting.
No, it's not. I'm originally from Germany. I came here 11 years ago.
And how many years have you been doing this?
So this is actually, this allotment you're standing on, I have this for 9 years now.
And have you seen lots of different things?
So actually I have quite a lot of things. I have foxes, little wood mice. They're actually quite cute. And then sometimes I even see like frogs hopping. So
amazing.
So, at least one hedgehog. And I have a camera trap where I can get the footage in the night. Sometimes I come here myself. So in the middle of the night, so quite exciting because there's nobody else here. It's just me and the wildlife. And it was magical, I tell you. And of course I've seen other things like big spiders moving and moths.
Because it's a whole other world, isn't it? The nighttime on the allotment, which is just as important, but we never see it.
Yeah, so I just want to create a space where I am happy and the pollinators and all the other wildlife are happy as well.
planting is obviously so important with bringing in wildlife. So
Yes.
talk me through how you do that.
So normally you try to cover the ground with something. You don't want loads of open ground. That's why the poached eggplant is actually a really good plant because it keeps the ground covered. It attracts the pollinators. The ground beetles, they're actually really good predators. So they eat slugs
Okay.
and they need ground cover.
Okay.
So if you want to get rid of slugs, cover your ground and you attract the ground beetle.
People think that having that ground cover, the slugs would live in amongst that, but their predators also live there
Yes,
as well.
especially like the ground beetles.
And I can see you've got
Yes.
some, is it aphid damage?
That is aphid, blister aphid, which goes to undercurrents, and this year is quite bad, but it's just cosmetic damage, really. It doesn't look nice, it doesn't affect the food, so, and something will come and eat the aphids.
So your ecosystem
Yes.
makes allowances for there being some pests
Yes.
on your produce.
Yes, you need the pests to get the predators. I mean, if the predators have nothing to eat, they will not be here, really. So you need the whole circle of life, really.
Nadine's plot is a wildlife wonderland. But creating an allotment like this doesn't mean you have to compromise on your capacity to grow great produce. Nadine still manages to grow a hearty crop of fruit and veg among the wildlife-friendly plants. So how are you growing produce in amongst all these flowers?
Yeah, it's actually helpful putting them in between, so hiding them. This is quite open because this is a new allotment, but eventually it will all be surrounded by flowers. It looks much prettier. And then second, also it hides them from pest species like pigeons.
Really?
Yeah, because pigeons, normally they go for things which are easily visible, so like edges and on flat open ground. They just fly to somewhere else where it's all nice and open, so they see it, and they just ignore my things.
And what are you growing?
Like I have pumpkins, like these,
Yeah.
sweet corn and tomatoes. I grow asparagus and lettuce. So all the normal produce, and we get several hundred kilograms.
Really?
Plots, yes.
That's
so it doesn't
amazing.
look like it, but they're actually there.
It's all here.
It's all here.
Just that you're in a really lovely setting as well.
Yeah.
One of the best ways to encourage a wealth of wildlife to your plot is to install a pond. And Nadine has taken this to the next level with not one, not two, but 3 ponds dotted around her allotment. Oh, wow.
Oh, look. There is an...
There's so much.
There's
It's
a newtlet.
amazing.
Look there.
Look at the newt.
There, this is a back swimmer.
And some tadpoles. And
And
what
then
are
they
these
like-
tiny ones?
There are all the water fleas.
That is
And the
incredible.
newt will eat the water fleas.
Yes.
There's a little snail and a tadpole.
So what made you want a pond like this on your allotment? Because it's huge.
Yes, it is. But I always loved ponds, and as a child, I loved pond dipping because it's such a different world in there. It's not just the insects and the animals inside the water. It's everything else. Like birds come here, and they clean their feathers in here, and it looks actually quite funny.
You've got some lovely plants around here.
I mean, the marsh marigold has already flowered,
Has
which
it?
is a really good wildlife plant. And I have the water mint down there. There are actually quite nice flowering plants as well in the pond.
So it looks lovely, but it has a really big function. And actually, a pond in itself is really important for
It
any
is.
wildlife garden, isn't it?
It's getting more and more important now because in the countryside there are not many ponds anymore. The only ones left are in our gardens and on our allotments, so that's the last refuge for many of these insects and these wildlife. They would completely go extinct without ponds.
And it would be such a tragedy if these were lost.
Yes.
So if this is the only kind of place they can survive, then
Yes,
as far as
so
I'm
we
concerned...
really need more ponds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
During the last decade, Nadine has recorded at least 10 different species of bumblebee on her plot, not to mention all the other insects, mammals and birds that have become frequent visitors. But the biggest impact has really come from her planting. Well, even in the rain today, we've seen so many pollinators and wildlife. It's incredible. But if I'm going to just pick a few of these plants, because I want to plant them all, if I just had to pick a few to take back to Kent, which ones would you recommend?
This time of year, really, is, for example, the ragdorbin, which you can just see there.
Yeah.
So it likes moist ground, but
Yeah.
bumblebees really like it.
Okay.
And then the hairbell, which is actually a native wildflower here. So the Notia macedonica, which is a really easy plant, good for dry soil. It self-seeds a bit, but never in a big way.
And
So
it's beautiful
it's
as well.
beautiful. And the last one I would recommend at this time of year is the horehound. It likes dry soil. This is a good plant to have, and it's loved by bumblebees.
Yeah. I'm so inspired by what Nadine has done here. She's created a plot that's beautiful and relaxing, but also one that works so hard for wildlife and for her own harvest. This is obviously in a league of its own when it comes to allotments, but there are so many ideas here that I can take back to Kent with me. And it's just got me thinking, with around 330,000 allotment plots across the country, just imagine if every one of us did a little bit to help the wildlife. Just think what a difference that could make.
I do think that it's wonderful that so many people are getting interested in wildlife and stopping seeing everything as a potential threat or a pest in the garden. And, as Francis says, if we all do something, it will make a big difference. And the place to start, I think, is always with insects. They're not the most glamorous wildlife, but they are probably the most important because everything is based upon that. And I suppose that the most attractive insect has to be the honeybee. And I've been keeping bees here at Longmeadow for the last 3 years now, under the watchful eye of my mentor, Gareth. And he's come to help me check on the state of both my hives. I'm very happy that we've got bees in here now because it was empty.
Yes.
For a while. Okay, if I take the lid off, is that right?
that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, there we go.
Let's see what we find.
There they are, look.
We've got all this fresh nectar. That's all full of eggs.
Right.
And newly hatched larvae. This is sealed larvae that's going to be hatching in the next few days. And looking at the colour and the attitude of the larvae, it's nice, it's healthy. Yeah. That might be 1,000 bees that we're going to add to the population within a week. And we've got probably 4 or 5 other frames.
1,000 bees in a week?
Yeah.
This is making a serious contribution
it is.
to the bee population.
We need every colony of bees that we can get.
Yeah.
I mean, this colony is progressing really well.
This style of top bar hive does seem to be much easier to manage.
What I like about this is, as we've been going through here, I think the main colony is over here.
Yes.
But they actually don't know we're here. The frame hives, as soon as I've got the roof off, everybody knows I'm there.
You would expect there to be quite a lot of honey in here because we haven't taken any out.
Last time we looked, everything was progressing.
Good. Let's have a look now.
Looking at a frame of honey like this, it gives you an idea of how much variety the bees have been foraging on.
So what variety do you see in that?
So we've got some slightly darker honey here.
Yes.
It's got a bit of colour to it.
Yeah.
We've got some very light white honey. This is probably a rape dandelion mix.
And so that reflects the different plant sources that they've got their nectar and their pollen from to make honey. So a garden is important that it has a good variety of plants.
It is. They need a completely balanced diet. They wouldn't be shopping for a whole myriad of different pollens if they didn't need them.
We're always told that bees like a glut. In this orchard, for example, when there's blossom, they'll just go to the blossom and nothing else. Yeah. Is that generally true? Do they just go to the nearest source and gorge on it?
What usually happens is foraging depends on age. Young bees will forage closer in, older bees will forage further out. So I know that they will forage 3 miles. They may well go further. It's like from here to London on a push bike for me.
Well, which, looking at your fine figure,
It's a long, long way.
let's take a little bit of honey out,
Yeah.
as much as as a matter of respect for their work, but leave the vast majority for them.
Yeah.
They're protected. We'll leave you alone now, guys. Excellent. We all come to gardening from different routes, but very often it's from a family connection, somebody who inspires us. But we went to visit a gardener in Shrewsbury who has made her own private and much-loved garden, inspired by her discovery of a passion for garden history.
My name's Adley Richmond, and I would describe myself as a garden, landscape and social historian. I was born in Zimbabwe and I came here when I was about 8 years old. I have always had a fondness for plants. My aunt had the most enormous garden and she had incredibly green fingers. So I think I've probably inherited a little bit of the interest from her to do gardening. Geraniums I love. So in this area you've got at least 4 or 5 different types. You've got the geranium phaeums over there which flowered quite early in the season. You've got geranium ibericum here which the bees absolutely love. On a summer's day there is a constant buzz. So, and the fact that I'm allergic to stings is a bit of a tightrope that I walk every day. Then you've got Andressii here. I tend to let things self-seed and it makes it look a lot more natural to me. This is more of a romantic border. It is supposed to be a lush border with lots of colour, lots of variety. I was working as a buyer in the automotive industry and I sort of realised that this really wasn't for me, and I just decided that I wanted to be a gardener. I went on to do my MA garden history, which was an absolute revelation. It really was. We were in Florence, and one particular garden that I really fell in love with was the Villa Castello. And I just loved the whole contrast of the greenery and the white statues. I absolutely adored Italian Renaissance gardens. What I loved was the whole iconography. Each element of the story was centred around a statue of some kind. It's just really, really sexy. It's just, you know, it's all a bit saucy, Italian Renaissance. The marble of the statue sort of mirrors and complements the marbling that has been used around the reflecting pond. This is supposed to be Apollo, and on the other side you've got Diana the Huntress, and they both of them have bows and arrows. And I chose these particular statues because they fit in with one of my other passions, which is the history of the elite sport of archery, which was very, very fashionable in the Georgian and early 19th century. And here Apollo can be seen with his hunting dog, who's just about to disappear behind the undergrowth. And above Apollo, you've got Rosa Wilchenblau, which when it's in full flower, frames the statue, and it looks absolutely glorious. The beauty of the whole area is that when it rains or is over full, It has a small gradient and it just waters the flower beds, which is very, very helpful. I've tried to create various sitting areas, which again is another element of garden history, this idea of views and vistas, you know, constantly looking out to a different viewpoint. This is one of the seating areas which gives you a nice view of the auricular theatre, and also this cotinus does give some shade. It is the smoke bush, and I find it's absolutely at its best at the end of a sunny day. The light filtering through from the side picks up this gorgeous colour. What I've tried to do here is constantly creating a sense of what's around the corner, so you have to keep moving through the garden. I do like the whole cottage garden sort of feel that people like Gertrude Jekyll sort of brought to their design. And basically I have a lot of roses. I think some people might say that I have a bit of a rose habit. This is one of my favourite parts of the garden. There are about 14 different roses. And so you have roses such as this gorgeous, gorgeous Gentle Hermione, which has got the most gorgeous scent. They do reflect that whole Edwardian era, the scent and the sound of the bees. What I've tried to do is create the separate rooms so you can't see the rest of the garden from this area because of the way that the path curves round each of the main plants. It's all rather unruly, but it does create that sort of belly pock, sort of garden of a golden age. As soon as the sun comes out, you have the scent of the roses, you've got the bees, you've got, you know, it is, yes, you could be in a small Edwardian garden, but it's mine.
Well, I do completely agree with Addy that what matters in a garden is that it's yours. It's your special, precious space. And one of the things that is very personal to me in the garden at this time of year, precisely at this moment, is this rose behind. This is Rosa Moisei geranium. And it has these blood red flowers, single flowers that bees love, that are dotted around the shrub like red stars in a sky. They don't overlap at all, and you get that curious speckled effect, really dramatic. Now, only flowers for a week. So for 51 weeks of the year, it may not have flowers, but for quite a long time, it carries fabulous hips, which in their own way are just as beautiful as that brief floral display. Obviously, to get a display as dramatic as that, you need space, and most people live in towns and cities and therefore have smaller gardens. And to get the best out of a small garden, inevitably, you need to use containers of some kind. And Rachel gives us a masterclass in how to make the very best of our summer containers.
I think this doorway and that lovely warm Cotswold stone is just crying out for an injection of colour so that this area either side of the door becomes a real statement in the garden. And there's nothing nicer, I think, than just using pots to create that colour. So I've rounded up pretty much every pot I've got. I've given them, most of them, a good clean up. And now really it's a matter of placing the plants. I love using pots in the garden. They're so versatile. Either planted up with annuals or more permanent plants, they can brighten up and add interest to any part or corner of the garden. So I've just started here with a rose, and this one's a beautiful English shrub rose called Gentle Hermione, and it really is that lovely kind of shell pink colouring, and that is a wonderful fragrance, a myrrh fragrance, really sweet and delicious. And then I just want to build up a nice recipe of plants to complement it, and I've chosen, just for a bit of real contrast with the colouring of the foliage, this heuchera. This is obsidian, which I think is my favourite dark-leaved variety. And of course, at the moment, it's also got these very pretty, rather airy stems of flowers. And then I think on this side, I'm going to put another heuchera, the same one. So keeping it fairly simple. I don't want to put too many things together because there's already going to be a lot going on in this area. And just firming the compost right the way round all the gaps there at the back. You don't want any air pockets. And this is just a good multi-purpose compost. This is peat-free, and it's also got some added John Innes. And then the last bit of this recipe is this lovely rhodanthenum. And just look at that. You see, I love the way that these little daisies, the centre of them just picks up on the leaf of the heuchera. I think that's a really lovely combination. And then you've got the contrast of that silvery, rather ferny foliage as well. So there's a lot of real loveliness going on in here. I've added some foxgloves on the other side of the door to bring balance to the rose, just so that we've got some more height, and underplanted them with calibrachoa to bring an extra bit of zing. So we've got the large pots in position now, and I've got all those lovely soft pinks, that really dark foliage, and I'm going to pick up on that with this beautiful foxglove. It's called Firebird, and it's a new one. And in its parentage, it's got the Canary Island foxglove, which is going to give it these really gorgeous, almost orangey flowers. And you've got this lovely dark stem. And this one's perennial as well. Now I'm going to try and get two more things in. Where there's a will, there's a way. So there's this beautiful little geum, Savannah Sunset, lovely, small flowers, quite a lot of gold in the centres there, but the little petals, they are just the most beautiful pale apricot, and that same slightly rusty tint down through the stems. And I think I might use an old trick with this lovely Stipa tenuissima, which is just to take some of the compost away from this root ball. It's still sort of fairly loose in there. And this is because really in containers, I think you do want things fairly close planted. It's not a long-term planting like in the garden. So very often these things are only going to be in here for a season or so. Important thing, of course, is to remember that you are responsible entirely for watering and for feeding. So a liquid feed for greedy plants once a week isn't amiss. And watering daily in hot weather, at least once a day. There we go. It does fit. Knew it would.
The beauty of using pots is that you can move plants around and change the look and feel of any display with ease. I can never resist a clematis or a dahlia, so they are going to be part of my mid-layer.
So we've now got the large pots and that mid-story. It's time for all those pretty little pots that you can just dot in amongst, and I just want to put individual plants into those. And the great thing about growing in pots is that you can have the growing conditions exactly that the individual plants require. So for example, these thyme like really sharp drainage. So I've got a little bit of multi-purpose compost with some horticultural grit just to make sure the roots don't sit in moisture. And this is going to be so popular with the bees while it's in flower, and equally popular with me because I'm going to pick the stems and use them in cooking. Another good reason to have it right by the door. These smaller pots give me a chance to grow some of my favourite little plants. Things like the dianthus, the saxifraga, and succulents, all of which actually like sharp drainage, so I can give them the conditions they need. It's a bit like painting a picture. You need to know when to stop, and I think I'm just about there. Just can't resist, though, this lovely little Tilbagia. It's called Purple Eye. Lovely little flowers. Not completely hardy, so it's going to need a bit of protection over the winter, but that really is the beauty of pots. It means that you can ring the changes with the seasons, you can move things around as and when you feel you want to, and also give the plants the right conditions that they need. So I think that's a jolly good day's work.
As Rachel shows, a pot is both an arrangement and also something that has the dimension of time. It's going to change, and you need to manage that change. I'm underplanting this cobea with a Bidens. This is one that glories in the name of Bidens Bee Dance Orange Splash. And I grew it first a few years ago and love the way that it holds this intense orange, slightly caramel colour for months. This will go on looking good well into September, if not October, as long as it's watered and fed regularly. And that's the key to good pots at this time of year, is planning their future so that they look as good at the end of summer as they do now. Well, the cobea has got a few weeks before that looks really good, but I think a little bit of colour at its base will make all the difference. Now, coming up on the rest of today's programme. Joe is in Cornwall with singer Will Young, who reveals his deep-rooted love of gardening.
This one has changed its name recently. That's another thing about plants, they change their name.
Like Prince. The grass formerly known as...
Exactly.
But first I want to divide and move some geraniums and also add a splash of new colour here into these borders. Now we've reached the longest day. The dual garden actually goes into a process of transition. We're going from all the energy of spring into the sort of velvety, luscious colour of full summer. And it takes a few weeks for that to happen. But you can speed the process along. And it's now time to cut back the hardy geraniums, which were so important in May. Now, there's one geranium in particular which is dominant in the early part of the year here in the dual garden, and that's geranium Fiam. And you can see that it's got this deep colour. Now, it's not just one colour. It can go from almost black, rich purple, right through to burgundy and a fairly pale mauve. And at this time of year, what you get is increasing amount of seed heads and fewer flowers. So it's a law of diminishing returns. Cut it back hard. At very least, you'll get a regrowth of foliage, and if we have a nice hot summer, we'll get some flowering too. And really importantly, plenty of room in which I can add annuals and dahlias and cannas and all the plants that make the late season so rich. So it's just a question of getting in there and cutting to the ground, and then you can see what you've got. When you cut it back, cut right back to the knuckle of the plant. And that way you get lots of light in there and it will regrow. Now that's that side. I'm going to now cut this one back. And I will leave some uncut. So I'm not going to deprive the bees completely of their meal. You can see here on this geranium farm, you've got a horseshoe of growth and practically nothing in the centre at all. And that's a classic herbaceous plant growth pattern. So the thing to do is to dig it up, chop those outer bits up and replant them. And if there is anything in the centre, a sort of woody core, that goes on the compost heap. So what I'm going to do here is to dig up some of it. There. So that's a nice good chunk, and I can plant that in my new beds like that, and that will grow strongly. And it might flower this year, but it certainly will next year. It'll be near the beehives and they will love it. I've got two geraniums here which have the same colour flower but very different growth habit. This is Anne Folkard. It's an absolute favourite. Magenta flowers, and the whole point about it is it rambles through other plants, and these bright magenta flowers which will keep on being produced into early autumn. And this is a geranium that I've not grown here in the jewel garden before. It's Geranium Silostemon. It's similar to Anne Folkard in the colour of its flower, this very blue-pink, magenta, but this really rockets and sprawls around. It's almost a climber. And so if you put it next to a shrub, it will work its way up into the branches. You could even train it, if you liked, up a support. And so unlike Geranium Farm, which forms a sort of clump that takes space, this doesn't dominate the planting around, but works with it. So these two are ideal if you're growing them in a border to accompany other plants. Right. Now, I've got quite a lot to do before I get to the point of planting those, because I want to clear all the Geranium Farm first and cut it back, and then work out the best place to position them. But now let's go to Cornwall with Joe, because he went down there a few weeks ago to visit the garden and family home of Will Young.
I've come to visit a musician and actor who I've heard is a pretty keen gardener himself.
Hello.
Hi, Will.
Welcome.
How you doing?
They're dogs.
There are dogs. There are dogs.
There are dogs everywhere.
What a stunning part of the world. It's absolutely beautiful here, isn't it?
It's great, isn't it?
So what's your connection to Cornwall?
Well, I've been living in Cornwall actually from about 14 years ago. So I started coming down this way because I was doing politics at Exeter. And then when I went into pop, I wanted to find a place, you know, just for some seclusion, and found this wonderful house. And then my parents came down 6 years ago and created this amazing garden.
And they're keen gardeners?
Yeah, my mum's garden designer, and she's a very keen gardener, as is my dad. My sister's a gardener, and I was a gardener throughout A-levels and university. I used to listen to music while I mowed, and before I entered Pop Idol, and I listened to my audition songs that I had to do, and earned the money to get up to London to do the audition.
Fantastic.
Through gardening.
Wow, so gardening, without gardening, you wouldn't be where you are today.
Essentially what I'm saying is, without gardening, where would I be? And I just love it. It's so good for the soul, and it's just a pleasure to be in this space, you know. Yeah. Would you like to see more of the garden?
Love to.
Come with me.
Yeah, love to. This is a lovely little, this is a garden within a garden, this area,
it is
isn't it?
actually, isn't it?
Beautiful.
Yeah. My mum wanted to create a gravel garden. All this bed here, apart from the olive tree and maybe a couple other plants, is all from cuttings that my parents have made. Okay. Cuttings or split plants.
Yeah, okay, so some proper serious gardening going on here
proper
then.
serious gardening.
And this is gorgeous, isn't it? I mean, and the level of it.
They
There's
do.
space between them as well.
And I know some of them. So this is a clematis. The trellis was my mum's cot when she was a baby.
Really?
Yeah. That's a cutting, but we got that from Hampton Court.
Yeah, it's a beautiful clematis, isn't
You've
it?
got the what do they call it?
Aquilegias.
Aquilegias.
Yeah.
So the yellows.
Granny's bonnet is the common name. Aquilegias. There's yellow ones.
Granny's
and
bonnet.
Granny's
I like that.
bonnet.
I can see that actually. But I know this one is a dachshund. Likes the heat, likes full sun.
Herbaceous perennial, I believe.
That's the one. What I love about being in gardens is not just like the plants and everything you get from that and the colours, but also all the nature that comes with it. So my dad makes a lot of bird boxes. That was meant to be for a wagtail, but it's become a bumblebee's nest, which I love, you know. And
Yeah,
so
bees going in and out,
you can
don't
see
they?
them go in and out, and then there's a wagtail that comes. And the cardoons, I learned a trick on Gardener's World, which is to prop them up, and then the plant grows through the
So
sort of little
stake
twigs.
them.
Stake them, but with sort of these delicate twigs to prop up the leaves.
You've been watching Monty?
Yes, I have. But I'm one of those sort of like slightly cavalier gardeners. Is I just like throw them in, see how it looks, learn the name afterwards. A bit like my songs, really.
Beautiful steps, Will. They're gorgeous.
Thank you
steps.
so much. They are actually gorgeous, aren't they?
They're very inviting.
They are inviting, and I think what I love about this garden is you can see the different levels of the rock there.
Yeah.
You know it's been there for ages.
It adds a real solidity, this local stone.
Yeah, yeah, and it's
Gorgeous.
very Cornish, and you see it everywhere.
But also the way, I mean, things are just self-seeded in here, aren't they? Like the little ferns and this little Welsh poppy.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? I really like these ornamental grasses as well.
I love grasses.
Yeah.
And, you know, I chop them down maybe October time, clear them out occasionally.
Leave them for the winter because they actually, a lot of them can hold their form and then cut them down in
Yes,
spring.
That makes sense.
Yeah, they look great through the winter. Deeper Gigantea at the back, it's just come out, it gets nice and tall. This one has changed its name recently. That's another thing about plants, they change their name.
Well, that's unfair.
That is unfair.
It's like Prince. The grass formerly known as...
Exactly.
So what is it now?
This is formerly known as Stipa arundinacea, and now it's called Anamanthale lawsoniana.
But you'd win a game at Scrabble, wouldn't you?
Well,
With
yeah,
that.
I'm not sure you get that past Scrabble. You need, no, I haven't got that many letters.
But we should go through,
Yeah.
and I'll show
Well,
you
these steps,
I love these steps.
they're great. Got the whole entourage with us still.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, we're a bit of a gang now.
Come on, you can
It's
do
only for the
it.
skinny people, isn't it? Come on, you coming through? Oh,
Well done.
well, a good little hop. So is this one of your favourite areas here?
Yes, this is. I love structural gardening. You know, I love literally that literal kind of landscaping of garden.
The process of gardening as well, isn't it, is very rewarding. It can engross you and take you away from things as well.
Oh yeah, because I mean I got very ill and I have a anxiety disorder, for want of a better phrase, and gardening's really helped me because it grounds me, and I have to kind of feel. You know, I like to feel the earth, and it's sensory. So it's definitely become a very beneficial thing for my well-being, and something that I actually deliberately put into my daily, weekly, monthly routine.
Right.
And I always liked gardening, but then I really started getting into it when I was in treatment, actually, because I had to go into treatment for anxiety.
Did they prescribe gardening?
Well, they sort of did, but then I sort of picked it up and created gardening at the place. Started growing dahlias and irises from, you know, bulbs, and sweet peas and some vegetables, and gardening very much gives to you. You know, like the process of creating something is sort of miraculous in a way. From a tiny seed or a tiny cutting, you can get these amazing plants. But you have to be patient and you have to nurture, and maybe the act of nurturing something else kind of maybe aids you to nurture yourself. And it's amazing how people talk about, you know, pills and, you know, counselling, things like that, which all do work. But actually, you know, gardening and nature is like a brilliant healer.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's just the best.
So what would you say to someone who, you know, who was in a similar position to you, who might have anxiety issues and is thinking about doing some gardening?
Don't be afraid, that's what I would say. Just start with one plant even, you know?
Yeah.
Pick a plant and don't be deterred because it's all trial and error anyway.
That's the thing. I mean, you know, things go wrong, we all have
Yes.
failures, but that's all part of life
It's all
anyway.
part of it.
And just keep going.
Yeah. And actually, I was speaking to a friend the other day, and she said, she's a great gardener, and she said, oh, when in doubt, garden. And I just thought that was lovely.
Do you get to a stage where you're aware of something happening, you think, right, I've got to go and get in the garden, I've got to
Yeah.
spend some time out there?
Yeah, definitely. And it has really helped kind of calm me down, and then I get to come here and feel the space of the garden, and it really relaxes me.
Do you find this place inspirational for your work?
I do, yeah. I mean, there's a shepherd's hut, you know, up behind us, and I come down and I write my songs down here. I write the lyrics. I wrote my latest record down here, and it is lovely to have just a vista to look out on, and just it gives more space in my head, you know, to be able to clear it all, and then I can just let the words flow.
Is there one aspect of gardening that you really like doing?
My favourite thing to do is to grow from seed or grow from bulb. I've just seen that one of my dailies has come up again. I was more excited about that than I probably was about my first #1. I mean, you know, some people would think it's tragic, but for me, I actually spoke to the dahlia. I said, welcome back.
I wouldn't mind a #1 though.
Would you? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, the Tweeny's got one, so... I was going to say we could swap jobs, but I thought I can't say that while I've got a record coming out.
Have you? Will, it's been great. Thank you so much for letting me into your garden and showing me around and spending time with you. It's been great.
Oh, well, it's my
Enjoyed it a lot.
pleasure.
This is when a greenhouse comes into its own. Now, it's really good that Will was talking so freely and openly about his anxiety, and hopefully even more people will now feel emboldened to share these problems and talk about them and know that there is no shame. There's no shame ever in being ill. And also, get out into the garden because it does help. Now, not hidden away at all are my chilies. Now, for the last few years, I've been growing chilies like this in relatively small terracotta pots. And that does two things. The terracotta doesn't hold water so well, which means they don't get too wet. And also, because they're small, it slightly stresses the plants. And that means you get a smaller plant, but the fruits tend to be very prolific and slightly more intense in taste. And that's what chilies are all about. They're not just hot, they're fruity and tasty. Chili omelette, first thing in the morning, that will perk you up for the rest of the day. And now you can see that this is a hot chili that is called heat wave. The fruits are forming. Now, I won't pick any of those until they're red. You must let them ripen because you don't get the full flavor. Another little tip about chilies is don't water them, if you can, after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Water chilies in the morning. And they absorb the water, and then if it cools down overnight, it means that they're not surrounded by rather cool, moist air, because that's when you can get problems. Now, in the back here, I've got some melons growing. These are growing in good-sized pot, plastic, because melons, which are members of the cucurbit family, really like masses of water, masses of heat, and really rich feed. So there's lots of compost in there. These will actually grow quite vigorously. They should reach just about the top of these canes and produce lots of flowers and quite a few fruits. But I'm not looking for a huge crop here. If I get a couple or at most 3 good melons from each plant, I'll be very happy. But there is something about growing your own melons and having that lovely sweetness that is worth quite a lot of trouble. Can't hear the rain. Yeah, that's stopped enough. Time to go back outside. All the rain that we've had in the last few days has flattened the Alchemilla mollis that's lining this path. And so now the path itself is hidden amongst a line of Alchemilla flowers. And what it means is that we can't use the path. It means I can't get at the box to trim them, which is something that I'd like to do as soon as we get some dry weather. But I don't mind. I'm very happy to have it out of commission for the sake of this lovely green beauty for the next few weeks. It's a job I shan't be doing. But here are some jobs that you can be doing this weekend. If you grow lupins, you can extend their flowering season by cutting off spent flower heads. Follow the stem down to a side shoot and remove it there. And this will put the energy into the new flowers rather than developing the seeds. Once the foliage of garlic becomes more yellow than green, it's time to harvest them. This will vary quite a lot between different parts of the country and different varieties, but the technique for lifting them is the same. Use a fork and never just yank them out, trying to keep as much of the roots on as possible. Then they can be taken somewhere to dry thoroughly before storing. Forget-me-nots are now no longer that lovely blue froth and have become a tangle of seed heads. The thing to do is to pull up almost all of them and take them to the compost heap. Leave a small patch and let those seed, and then you can redistribute the seedlings in the autumn. I think the foxgloves give me as much pleasure as any other flower at this time of year. And all these ones here are self-sown. They've just popped up. And they do that all over the garden, along the margins and the edges and the corners. And the bumblebees love them as much as I do. And for the middle of June and early July, foxgloves reign supreme, I think. But that's it for this week. We'll be back next week, of course, but at the earlier time of 8 o'clock. So join us then. Bye-bye.